Every Scandinavian player comes into the game feeling confident. He's memorized the lines, he knows where the queen's going, he knows when to pin your knight, and that's exactly why he's going to fall. In this video, I'm going to show you 6 traps to absolutely crush this player, including 3 where you win his queen and 2 that end in checkmate. In every single one, he's going to think you're falling for his tricks right up until the moment his only option is to resign. So yeah, no messing around. I'm Philip. Let's jump right in. First, queen to a5, probably the most common move you're going to face. We respond with d4, taking the center with the pawn. He develops knight to f6, and we follow up with knight to f3. The first trap shows up when he goes for the pin with bishop to g4, which is a really common move from Scandinavian players. At first glance, it looks like a strong move because it pins the knight against our queen. But here's where our idea kicks in. We play h3. Now, if he retreats, we gain a tempo on his bishop, but a lot of players go queen to h5, pinning the knight and pinning that pawn too. So once you throw in the bishop, we end up losing the rook, and that's exactly what we do. We take the bishop and pretend we fell for his trick, but we've got a counter trick of our own, because after he takes the rook, we win his queen. That's right, the queen's got nowhere to go, because once we play knight to e2, the queen's trapped. h2 is covered by the knight, this square by the pawn, this one by the knight, this one by the pawn, and this one by the bishop back on c1. No matter what black does, our next move is going to be knight to g3, threatening the queen. The most played move, for example, is knight takes on g4, but that doesn't really change anything, because after knight to g3, not only does it attack the queen, it also covers the square the pawn was controlling. So the only move is to give up the queen for the bishop, and after king takes, we're up a queen with a completely winning position. Now let's check out another trap where we can win his queen too. Here, instead of playing d4 like we did in the other position, you go pawn to b4, attacking the queen, and the most common response is for him to grab the sacrificed pawn. After that, you follow up with knight to b5, keeping the pressure on, and this time threatening to take on c7 and fork the king and the rook. Because of that, black has to react right away, and the most common move is queen to a5, which defends the pawn and gets the queen to safety in case white can't attack her again. After queen to a5, you develop with bishop to c4, and black thinks you've lost your mind because you sacked a pawn and still haven't even gotten the fork on c7. At this point, they play a6 or sometimes c6, which is pretty much a move every Scandinavian player makes anyway, giving the queen a square to retreat to. But now we've got a trick. Bishop takes on f7, sacking the bishop. And let me ask you, can you already spot the trick? If you've trained calculation with me over at Think Ahead, you already saw it coming. After king takes the bishop, you follow up with queen to h5, check, and after he plays pawn to g6, it looks like black completely shut down your plan. But if you take a closer look, there's an x-ray on his queen, and you play knight to d6 with discovered check, and that wins the queen. After pawn takes, you take on a5, ending up a queen up with a completely winning game. Now let's look at what else your opponent might try after we play knight to c3, attacking the queen. A sneaky little move that looks harmless is queen to e6 check, and here I'd recommend blocking with bishop to e2, which is the most common move. He follows up with a knight to c6, and at this point you've got to play aggressively, because instead of going knight to f3 and castling, what we want to do is punish him. So we follow up with d4, already threatening the fork on d5. What's funny is that most Scandinavian players always seem to have a trick up their sleeve, and the moves I'm showing you always make it look like their plan's gonna work. And sure enough, here they play queen to g6, attacking the pawn on g2. At this point, you basically say, go ahead, take the pawn, and you go knight to b5, hitting c7 right away. So if they take on g2, it looks like he got his threat in first and you're going to lose material. But that's not actually true, because you've got bishop to f3, which attacks the queen and defends the rook at the same time. Now the queen is forced to retreat to g6 again, meaning black only grabbed a pawn and wasted time going back and forth, while your knight on c7 is brutal, because on top of winning a pawn, it forces the king to lose castling and also wins the rook. But now you might ask me, what if it's a smarter opponent who tries to protect c7? The only way to do that is with king to d8, which leaves him completely exposed and loses castling. On top of that, you add another attack on c7 with bishop to f4, and the only defensive try in the position is to play e5, but that doesn't work because you can take with the pawn with a discovered check from your queen. And now, what can black even do here? They can't play king to e8 or there's the fork on c7. And if the king goes to e7, you follow up with knight takes on c7, attacking the rook. Rook to b8 is forced, and now you can follow up with the brilliant bishop to g5 check. And what you want to do is deflect the queen off of d6 so you can play queen to d6 checkmate. So now when the opponent moves the queen back home, how can you punish him? After all, he wasted a whole tempo with the queen. And that's exactly what I'm going to show you, because there's a really nasty trap here. We follow up with d4, dominating the center, and he plays knight to c6, adding another attack on the pawn. And here, once again, we're going to play knight to f3. You already know the opponent's next move, of course, bishop to g4, pinning the knight and renewing the threat to take on d4. And now, how do we defend? If we play bishop to e2, black's going to play bishop takes the knight, and then they grab our central pawn, and we end up down a pawn without punishing him at all. If we play bishop to e3, defending the pawn, they take the bishop, and when we take back, we're down a pawn again. At first glance, it looks like we're in serious trouble, and nothing really works. Here, I'd recommend pushing the pawn to d5, attacking the knight. I know it's a move that looks terrible at first because the knight goes to e5, and now our knight is being attacked twice, and there's also an x-ray on the queen. And now, in the last two examples, we were the ones winning as queen, but now it's time to return the favor and play knight takes on e5, as if to say, go ahead, take my queen, because whether they take it or not, we're already winning. If he plays bishop takes the queen on d1, you follow up with bishop to b5 check, and the king has nowhere to run. On top of that, we've got the whole white square diagonal under control. So if the queen blocks, for example, we win the queen back. And once the king moves, we take the bishop, ending up 2 pieces up. And of course, the king can't take the bishop because the knight's defending it. Now, if instead of the queen blocking, he plays c6, we take the pawn and we're threatening to push c7, which would be checkmate. Another option would be to play knight to f6 to defend d7 with the knight, and if he plays that, you take on b7 with discovered check. He'd be forced to block the check, and we'd take the rook, promoting to a new queen. But then you might say, hey Philip, black can stop us from pushing and taking by playing queen to c7 and giving the king the d8 square, right? If black does that, you follow up with pawn takes on b7 check, and when the king goes to d8, you play knight takes on f7, and that's checkmate. This trap is absolutely fantastic. Now I want to show you a more aggressive and fun way to punish him. After he plays queen to a5, you follow up with bishop to c4 instead of knight to f3, and that way you don't have to deal with the pin from bishop to g4, which is exactly what he wants. After all, he's already used to doing that in every game. Then comes knight to f6, a normal move in the Scandinavian, and this time, instead of d4, I'd recommend playing d3, backing up our bishop. In this position, the most played move is bishop to g4, because after all, it's what black does in every game. But now the difference is you respond with pawn to f3. In other words, you're attacking the bishop with the pawn, not the knight. Black retreats to h5, and you follow up with bishop to d2, already creating an x-ray between your bishop and his queen, setting up a discovered attack idea at some point as soon as that knight on c3 moves. Now, our plan here is to play queen to e2 and castle long at some point. Normally, black follows up with c6, a common move in the opening, already taking away some knight squares and creating an escape square for the queen to deal with any future discovered attacks. You stick with your plan and play queen to e2, getting ready to castle long. From here, what's your plan? Well, if they follow up with knight to d7, you immediately go g4, attacking the bishop and forcing it back to g6, and you continue the attack with f4, planning to push f5 and win the bishop. Black is forced to create an escape square for the bishop and plays h6, so you follow up with f5, and now the bishop is completely out of play. It's like black is down a piece. At this point, we can exploit the x-ray between the bishop and the queen by playing knight to b5. And this move has a little trap in it. The queen is attacked, and if the queen goes to b6, for example, you can follow up with knight to d6, check. And since that pawn is pinned, black is forced to move the king to d8. Then you play knight to f7, a fork that wins the rook. Another option in this position is the queen going back to d8, which is completely crazy because it's mate in 1 with knight to d6 checkmate. Now, I want to show you what happens when your opponent plays knight to f6 instead of taking the pawn on d5 with the queen. This variation can confuse you if you don't know how to punish it, so here you just play d4, dominating the center. You might ask yourself, aren't you going to defend the pawn? The answer is no, and actually that's exactly what they want. They play knight takes on d5 and end up with a strong knight in the center, but we counter immediately with c5. Normally, the ideal square for the knight in this position is knight to b6, and after that retreat, we end up with this strong pawn center while the opponent just kept bouncing his knight around the board. From here, I'd recommend playing knight to f3, developing to peace, and at this point, the most common move from your opponent is bishop to g4, pinning the knight. As you know, this is one of the favorite moves from Scandinavian players, and I'm going to teach you how to punish it. The first thing is don't even think about playing bishop to e2 because it's passive and we want to keep the initiative. But let's understand the subtleties of the position because they're threatening bishop takes on f3, then queen takes on f3, so we don't wreck our pawn structure. And at the end of the line, we lose the d4 pawn. Yes, you're right. But in this position, you follow up with c5 attacking the knight, which goes back to the center. At first glance, it looks like we're pushing pawns for no reason, and the knight just went back to the center where it can't be kicked out of any pawn anymore. Yes, that's true, but now we've got a very strong attack by following up with queen to b3. This move does three things at the same time. It keeps defending the knight on f3 and puts pressure on the knight on d5, and attacks b7, which can only be defended passively, like queen to b8, for example, which would hang the knight on d5, so that's out of the question. They can also retreat the bishop to c8, but then we'd have a huge lead in development, so the most common move is b6. But now all the pawns are on dark squares, and that creates a ton of weaknesses on the light squares. Alright, knowing that, go ahead and pause the video and find a finishing blow. What would you play here? What stands out to you? Here's a tip. Find active moves that create threats, moves that threaten mate, moves that threaten a piece, that trade pieces, that kind of thing. The first move that stands out is to play bishop to b5 check, taking advantage of all the weak light squares. But that move doesn't work because he can play c6 and block the diagonal since the knight on b8 is controlling that square. So before playing bishop to b5, we need to somehow control that square twice, and that's why you first play knight to e5. This is the key move, because it attacks the hanging bishop on g4 and also puts pressure on the weak light squares. He can't play knight to f6 to defend the bishop because it leads to queen takes on f7 checkmate. Because of that, the most common move is to follow up with bishop to e6, defending the knight, and also putting our queen in an x-ray, which can be dangerous. But instead of moving the queen, the better move is bishop to b5 check, and now this move just works perfectly. Look, if he moves the bishop back to d7, we can follow up with queen takes the knight, and now we're threatening checkmate, so that defense doesn't work. Because of that, the most natural move is to play c6, but from there, you can follow up with knight takes on c6, and after knight takes, we play bishop takes the knight check, attacking the rook at the same time. And of course, before that, they have to deal with the check first. For sure, the queen's not going to block, so the only option left is bishop to d7. And now, do you take the rook? If you want to, you can take it, but there's an even stronger move, which is bishop takes the knight, continuing the threat on the rook. If the opponent is so stunned by our attack and decides to move the rook, you can follow up with bishop takes f7 checkmate and win the game. Alright, but is there any way to defend and stop the checkmate? Yes, and it's the move e6. After that, you take the rook and you end up a rook and a pawn up with a completely winning game. It all looks easy when I'm walking you through it, but what about when you have to find it on your own with nobody guiding you? Just like in that position where I asked you to pause and find the finishing blow. How long did it take you to find the right sequence? If it took a while, that's okay. And if you didn't find it, that's okay too. But pay attention to what was going on in your head in that moment. You probably saw 2 or 3 moves that looked strong, jumped from one to another, calculated 3 moves into a line, then went back and jumped to another one and forgot what you'd calculated in the first one. And in the end, you just guessed the one that looked most natural. That's not a lack of talent, it's a lack of method, and that's exactly what I teach in Think Ahead, my calculation course. Inside the course, I walk you through the complete process, when to calculate and when not to, and just make the move with what you already know, how to identify the right candidate moves before you start calculating on impulse, how to organize the variations without getting lost, and how to predict your opponent's best defense before he plays it. If that makes sense to you, the link is down below in the description and in the pinned comment. Now, you know that bishop pin on your knight that showed up in this line? It's going to show up against you all the time in a bunch of different openings, and most players just accept the pin and keep developing like nothing happened. The problem is that bishop is killing your knight's mobility and compromising your development. And when you get to the middle game, all these plans you just learned become a lot harder to pull off because your position came out of the opening already weakened. Click on the video that's popping up on your screen right now, where I'm going to show you Capablanca's method to punish this pin in 5 different ways, whether you're playing white or black. It's the kind of knowledge that makes sure you get to the middle game with a good position to pull off everything you learned here. So click now, because if you stop here, you already know how this story ends. If you enjoyed and learned something new, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next video.